It's just worldview warfare. In this episode, I'm going to go into greater detail on the ancient endeavor to fulfill the great work, which is the ultimate end goal of all revolutionary worldview warfare. The rulers of the world system have, for thousands of years, been waging an ongoing war to stop the destruction of the world system. Strategically, a main objective of this war is to cultivate and reinforce among all humankind the worldviews that are most expedient to those rulers. There are countless worldviews that could fit the bill here, but in this episode, we will only cover a few. No matter what the worldview is, however, it fits the bill if it is ultimately supportive of, or at least is not in opposition to, the great work. Basically, the great work symbolizes humankind's attempt to attain godhood and to create utopia. When I say creating utopia, I am referring to the notion of creating collective peace and prosperity within the dystopia of the world system. In other words, the notion that humankind can establish order out of chaos. When I say attaining godhood, I'm referring to the notion of attaining unity of the self and the divine in essence. In other words, the notion that an individual can somehow unlock some innate quality of divine personhood. This is also referred to as awakening the divine within. Let's take a look at some of the ways that the endeavor to fulfill the great work is playing out today. Recall that the world system has a light side and a dark side. We are all very familiar with the dark side. Just look at the various nihilistic worldviews being normalized today through philosophy and art. The brother Days of Noah did an excellent analysis of this in his documentary entitled The Strangest Youth Culture in History.
It is important to detail two specific levels of nihilism. This is the concept of normative nihilism and deep nihilism. Normative nihilism can be considered as a macro sense of nihilistic tendencies, the generalized behaviors that come with the lack of care, empathy, and concern for oneself, others, and their society as a whole. We see normative nihilism everywhere. You hear about it everywhere. Yet most people have no idea these tendencies and behaviors are forms of nihilism. Basically, today it is pretty normal to not care about your society, your community, and even yourself, or only caring about yourself and no one else. This is not only rooted in generalized narcissism, but it is accompanied by nihilistic perspectives. And the hypothesis here is that these concepts are being indoctrinated into our society and mainly our youth via mainstream media, social media, and mass entertainment. The other level of nihilism is one that is more severe, typically a micro sense of nihilistic tendencies. It is more isolated in our culture, yet it is extremely debilitating and is growing in number thanks to many music artists and nihilistic social media platforms. That is deep nihilism. Basically, with deep nihilism, we get the exaggerated and extreme end of normative nihilism. Instead of depression, we go further to suicidal ideation. Or instead of promiscuity, one turns to actually selling one's body. Instead of homosexuality, one goes deeper into pansexuality, bestiality, or transhumanism and gender dysphoria. This spectrum of nihilism is increased by drug use and media indoctrination. Currently, hip-hop and pop culture are displaying symptoms of a normalized, nihilistic, and narcissistic socio-mental disorder. And these behaviors within the industries are being found within the general audience. Is our postmodern pop culture rendering mass society mentally ill?
But there is an equally powerful and competing side of the world system, the light side. This side is coming into greater popularity as more and more people reach out for solutions to the growing uncertainty stemming from today's psychological and societal chaos. And uncertain minds tend to be receptive minds. So despite today's exaltation of shallowness via hyperconsumerism, growing numbers of people have a fascination for the depths of the human mind. Despite the rampant materialism of today, growing numbers of people have a feeling that there is more to life than meets the eye. Despite the intensifying anxiety of the day, growing numbers of individuals feel a sense of collective interconnectedness that even includes nature. Despite the intensification of depression today, growing numbers of people believe that there exists an ultimate purpose to existence and that this purpose can be found within oneself. Moreover, growing numbers of people are undergoing specialized training through which they can awaken the divine within and harness it to help bring about collective change. This growth of socio-spiritual activism is largely due to the various esoteric worldviews being normalized today through philosophy and art. Western esotericism came on the scene during the Renaissance, a 13th century philosophical and artistic movement in Europe. It greatly influenced its rival, Western nihilism, which would not come on the scene until the 17th century philosophical and artistic movement in Europe known as the Enlightenment. Interestingly, both nihilism and esotericism perpetuate Western Gnosticism. Western Gnosticism arose during the 3rd century from philosophical and artistic movements at the intersection of Europe, Asia, and Africa. Gnosticism values Gnosis as the pathway to truth. Gnosis is inner revelation gained through personal experience. Inner revelation refers to hidden higher knowledge of the divine within. Such knowledge is considered to be inaccessible without specialized training, long known as initiation. Gnosticism arose in reaction against two other pathways to truth in the West: faith, as dominated by Judeo-Christianity, which esotericists would come to regard as the language of tyranny, and reason, as long dominated by the natural sciences, which nihilists would come to regard as the language of madness. Esoteric worldviews can be categorized as either mystery or common. Common esotericism is softcore. It draws on metaphorical language and is dismissive of rational explanation of non-rational phenomena. Imagination or intuitive perception is key here because initiation is open to everyone in this case. Common esotericism stresses non-dogmatic interpretation. Thus, no one should accept any idea unless it concords with their own reason. However, if a student does not question his or her own reason, there is no challenge to the self. Recall that the challenge is to awaken the divine within and then harness it to help bring about collective change. Mystery esotericism is hardcore. It stresses literal, authoritative interpretation of mystery symbols. Oaths of allegiance to the world systems are key here because initiation is only open to those meeting the requirements set by the mysteries. The mysteries are comprised of elite, secretive, fraternal organizations that operate in worshipful cooperation with the superhumans who transmit the hidden higher knowledge conveyed through Gnosis. Recall that strategically, a main objective of the war to avert the world system's destruction is to cultivate and reinforce among all humankind the worldviews most expedient to the world system's rulers by 2025, which is the latest deadline. Where does the deadline of 2025 come from? One of the most popular sources, the writings of a human influencer named Alice Bailey. Disenchanted by evangelical Christianity, Bailey gravitated towards the esotericism of a 19th century philosophical and artistic movement known as Theosophy. She went on to formulate her own esoteric framework and eventually co-founded one of the few non-governmental organizations authorized to partake in the day-to-day work of the United Nations. Bailey admitted to writing over 24 esoteric books under the guidance of a superhuman influencer. In one of those books, the year 2025 is given as the time by which humankind must be prepared to enter the next stage in the ancient endeavor to fulfill the great work. In keeping with her theosophical background, she would often refer to the world system's superhuman rulers as the hierarchy. Bailey wrote that the hierarchy wants humankind to be ready when they come out of the shadows and openly reveal themselves. In totality, Bailey's books promote a complete spiritual reorientation of humankind, which implies utopia, fostered at the individual level by awakening the divine within, which implies apotheosis. Adherents to Bailey's teachings are still carrying the torch, writing and speaking in various places like social media and peer-reviewed journals. Those communications variously recast in present-day terms Bailey's quest to articulate how she was being affected by the climate of the times she was living in, namely upper-class England and working-class United States, both during the chaos of World Wars I and II, revealing who she sees as the main culprits of that dystopian chaos. She writes, "First of all, it must be recognized that the cause of all world unrest, of the world wars which have wrecked humanity and the widespread misery upon our planet, can be largely attributed to a selfish group with materialistic purposes who have for centuries exploited the masses and used the labor of mankind for their selfish ends." So Bailey is against the dark side of the world system, especially the corruption increasingly pervading every aspect of Western culture, from economics and science to politics and religion. Nihilism and other worldviews that align with the world system's dark side portray the materially weak like the poor, corporally weak like the physically disabled, and the mentally weak like the intellectually disabled as useless and thus fair game for exploitation. Repackaging Gnostic apotheosis in scriptural terminology, Bailey writes, "Only through the revelation of the Christ within each human being can this at-one-ment be made. Only through the new birth, the baptism of spirit and of fire, and the transfiguration of the nature can deliverance be found, can unity with God be achieved." So Bailey is also against the greatest threat to both the dark and the light side of the world system, the gospel of Christ Jesus. But Bailey refers to the Christ within, so that implies that she is supportive of that gospel, correct? No. You see, The gospel of Jesus Christ is basically a royal announcement of a system of societal and spiritual authority operating above and against the world system. In this heavenly system, also known as the kingdom of the Most High God, Jesus alone is the true and living ruler of the natural realm as well as the supernatural realm, because Jesus is fully human, meaning that he is a real man. Yet at the same time, Jesus is not a mere man, but is one of the three divine persons comprising the eternal Godhead. What esotericism and other worldviews that align with the world system's light side does is portray Jesus as essentially a mere man. This brings us to some Christological controversies that sprung up in the 4th century church, before the institutions of Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, and certainly before Protestantism. These controversies centered on how humans as creatures can come to know the uncreated Most High God. These controversies led to splits in the church. There were some who held that God is entirely unknowable. This Christology would come to be referred to as Arianism. We also see that there are traces of Arianism within nihilism. There were others who held that God can be fully known in entirety. This Christology would come to be referred to as Eunomianism. Although both of those Christologies come to different conclusions, they are both premised on the notion that Jesus Christ is a creature, a mere man. This can be considered an inverted form of apotheosis. Instead of elevating a human to godhood, God is lowered in entirety to the level of a human. Moreover, this touches on the core of worldview warfare. Remember that on one hand, worldview warfare focuses on a target audience's view of themselves. On the other hand, worldview warfare focuses on a target audience's view of others. Others can be nature, fellow humans, or even God. So we have two supernatural kingdoms at war. The kingdom of the Most High God versus the world system. Both kingdoms recognize each other's existence and both openly seek to capture each other's receptive human members by means of worldview warfare. The world system employs revolutionary worldview warfare, and the kingdom of the Most High God employs counter-revolutionary worldview warfare. I will discuss counter-revolutionary worldview warfare in greater detail sometime in the future. In either case, in this war, there is no neutral ground for humankind. In conclusion, there are two key takeaway points from this episode. Number one, revolutionary worldview warfare can be used to advance any worldview, as long as that worldview is ultimately supportive of, or at least is not in opposition to, the great work. Number two, in worldviews that are facilitative of the great work, the weak are regarded as useless, and Christ Jesus is regarded as a mere man. These discussions are a companion to my book entitled Revolution, the Art and Science of Worldview Warfare. It cites hundreds of scientific articles and elite books on the great work. Thank you for your time. Stay tuned. Next, we will explore in greater detail the zeitgeist.